The hum of the courtroom's air conditioning was like an irritating insect, a low frequency that vibrated directly into Elise Lara's bones. She swayed gently, a movement almost imperceptible to most, but to her, it was a metronome that kept the world from dissolving into a chaos of sensory stimuli. Before her, prosecutor Marco Zielinski Schwartz stared with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile, the kind you see in nature documentaries just before the attack. "Ms. Lara," he began, his unctuous voice filling the room's tense silence. "Could you describe for the jury why a data journalist like yourself was at a violent protest? Isn't that a bit outside your area of expertise?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Elise was 34 years old and had never imagined her meticulous pursuit of truth would land her in the defendant's chair, accused of assaulting a police officer, Officer Carter Fournier, who now watched her from the front row with an air of barely disguised contempt. She had spent her entire life learning to navigate a world not built for her mind. Her autism wasn't an illness, it was her operating system, and her system was incredibly good at detecting patterns, inconsistencies, and above all, lies. "I was not at a violent protest, Mr. Schwartz," she replied, her voice monotone yet clear. "I was documenting a peaceful demonstration where violence was initiated by the police. My data is clear." Schwartz let out a condescending chuckle. "Your data." He repeated the word as if it were an expletive. "What we have are the testimonies of two decorated officers, Carter Fournier and Michael Roberts, and a body cam video that clearly shows you advancing on them. But of course, perhaps your condition makes you interpret events differently." It was a low blow, calculated to poison the jury, to paint her as unstable, unreliable, a different woman. She felt the jury's eyes on her, a mix of pity and suspicion. Her defense attorney, the young and overwhelmed Jacob Aiden, rose to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. Elise remained calm, her swaying just a little faster. She had expected this. She had seen the signs for weeks. A quick flashback flooded her mind. Not a memory, but an overlay of data points. The way the subpoena was delivered past the legal deadline. The fact that the body cam footage provided to the defense was missing exactly 37 seconds at the crucial moment of the incident. The discovery that the judge in this case had played golf with the police union chief the previous month. They were small anomalies, whispers in the vast symphony of information she constantly processed. To others, they were coincidences. To Elise, they were the knots of a net closing around her. She had kept these observations to herself, sharing them only in coded notes with her only ally. Revealing her strategy too early would be like showing her hand in a poker game with cheaters. Her calmness seemed to further irritate the prosecutor. "You seem remarkably composed for someone facing such serious charges, Ms. Lara," Schwartz taunted, almost detached. "Is that how you handle violence? With this coldness?" He was trying to corner her, hoping for an outburst, a meltdown that would prove his point. But he was poking the wrong person. Elise's mind didn't operate on impulsive anger. It operated on logic and inevitability, and she saw the outcome of this confrontation with a clarity that would have terrified Marco Zielinski Schwartz if he could glimpse it for a second. Injustice wasn't new to her. She remembered teachers calling her stubborn for not making eye contact, classmates mocking her intense interests, a world constantly trying to sand her down until she fit a mold that didn't suit her. Each of those experiences hadn't broken her. It had forged her. It built a quiet resilience, an inner fortress from which she observed, analyzed, and waited. Officer Fournier, in the front row, whispered something to his partner Roberts, and they both chuckled. Their arrogance was palpable, the certainty that they had successfully framed another citizen who dared to challenge their power. They saw a strange, vulnerable woman on the witness stand. What they didn't see was the strategist who had already mapped out their every move, every lie, and was 3 steps away from delivering checkmate. There, before all the disdainful eyes, she stood firm like one guarding a secret too powerful to reveal before its time. They thought they were judging an autistic woman for assault. Little did they know, it was she who was judging them. If this story of prejudice and a broken system has enraged you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because you won't want to miss how one woman's disconcerting calm turned into the perfect storm that would bring down everyone who dared to underestimate her. The trial dragged on for days, each session a new layer of humiliation, meticulously applied by Marco Zielinski-Schwartz. He deepened the injustice with the precision of a sadistic surgeon, twisting every aspect of Elise's personality to turn it into proof of her guilt. Her need for routine was painted as obsessive rigidity. Her literal honesty was portrayed as social ineptitude and aggression. Her difficulty with eye contact was presented as a classic sign of deception. The prosecutor seemed to revel in the process, underestimating her at every turn. "Ms. Lara, you spent 72 consecutive hours analyzing the city's traffic patterns for an article. Doesn't that sound a bit manic to the jury?" he asked once, a sneer on his face. Elise replied with her usual calm, "It sounds like doing my job correctly, Mr. Schwartz. Something you might try." The comment elicited a murmur in the room and a furious glare from the prosecutor, who quickly changed the subject. Schwartz's cruelty wasn't confined to the courtroom. Leaked news stories to the press, rife with insinuations about Elise's unstable mental health, began appearing in online tabloids. Her landlord, reading one of these articles, served her with an eviction notice, citing a clause about disruptive behavior. Her few data consulting clients canceled their contracts, fearing the negative association. The web she had detected was now strangling her, isolating her from the world, precisely as planned. Officers Fournier and Roberts were even worse. Outside the courtroom, they subtly intimidated her. Once, Fournier brushed past her in the hallway and accidentally knocked over her stack of documents, scattering them on the floor. "Oops, sorry. Things just fall sometimes, don't they?" he said with a wink, a veiled reference to the accusation that she had pushed him. Roberts, in turn, liked to linger close to her, invading her personal space, knowing it would cause extreme sensory discomfort. They were small acts of torment, designed to destabilize her before she entered the courtroom. What they didn't know was that every act of contempt was being processed and filed away in Elise's mind. Every insult, every sneering glance, every lie uttered in court didn't weaken her. It fueled her resolve. It was just another data point in her analysis, strengthening the inevitability of her conclusion. She remembered her mentor, retired Judge Amelia Leroy, a woman who saw her not as a collection of deficits, but as a brilliant mind. "The system is flawed, Elise," Amelia had told her once years ago in her dusty library. "It's made of people, and people are prejudiced, lazy, and corruptible. But the law, at its core, is a system. It's logic, and that's where you'll beat them. You see the system in a way they never will." That memory was her anchor. Elise's motivation wasn't revenge, not in the passionate sense. It was the restoration of order. It was the correction of an equation that had been deliberately unbalanced. Their lie was a dissonance in the universe, and her mind craved harmony. During one of the breaks, she saw Schwartz showing a message on his phone to Fournier, and they both laughed loudly. Using the reflection in the hallway window, Elise managed to read part of the message. "The weirdo is almost at the end of the line. The judge will swallow it all." Arrogance. It was their most predictable mistake. They saw her as an anomaly to be crushed, not an adversary. And that arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. That night, in her small apartment, surrounded by screens displaying lines of code and data spreadsheets, she made a video call. On the other side of the screen was Takumi Jones, a forensic tech genius and former research assistant to Judge Leroy. "They're biting the bait, Taku," she said, no preamble. "Their arrogance has blinded them completely." Takumi smiled. "Perfect. The audio analysis from the third camera is complete. I found what you were looking for. They not only planned the provocation, but they also bragged about it afterward, thinking the radio was off. A small signal, a small victory amidst the storm." Elise didn't smile, but an attentive observer would notice the tension in her shoulders decrease by a millimeter. She wasn't a passive victim. She was a hunter, and the predators were about to discover they had walked into her territory. For a moment, as she lowered her head the next day, while Schwartz listed her supposed character flaws to the jury, everyone thought they had broken her spirit. But those who know true strength know that it grows precisely in silence, in patient observation, in the quiet certainty that the chessboard is set and the final move is about to be made. Elise's response began not with a bang, but a whisper. In the middle of another day of humiliation, her lawyer, Jacob Aiden, who looked increasingly defeated, received a USB drive from her during a recess. Analyze the file Paradox of Precedent. Compare it to the case State versus Donovan, 1987. The motion must be filed at 2 p.m. Not a minute before, not a minute after, she instructed, her voice low and precise. Jacob, accustomed to passive or panicked clients, was perplexed. He opened the file on his laptop, and his eyes widened. It was a brilliant legal analysis, an argument that sidestepped Schwartz's fabricated evidence and attacked the very legality of the prosecution based on a technical detail everyone had overlooked. It was complex, audacious, and absolutely genius. For the first time in weeks, Jacob felt a spark of hope. He wasn't just her lawyer, he realized he was a piece on her board, and he was happy to play his part. The real key ally, however, operated in the shadows. Takumi Jones was more than a tech expert. He was a digital ghost. While the court focused on Elise, Takumi was in his lab, waging a different war. He had obtained the original, unedited body cam recordings, not through official channels, but by exploiting a security flaw in the police department's cloud storage server, a flaw Elise herself had identified in a public security report 6 months prior, which the police had, ironically, ignored. In these raw files, the truth was undeniable. The footage clearly showed Officer Fournier grabbing an elderly protester's arm. Elise had approached not to attack but to record his badge number, stating loudly, "Officer 95B, I am documenting your excessive use of force." That's when Fournier turned, shoved her, and his camera, conveniently, fell, creating the 37 seconds of chaos the prosecution used against her. Marco Zielinski Schwartz continued his courtroom show, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. His arrogance was a spectacle in itself. "You see, members of the jury," he said in his closing arguments, gesturing towards Elise, "what we have here is not a champion of justice. It is a person who doesn't understand social boundaries. A person who, due to her condition, cannot process the world as we do." She saw an officer maintaining order, and, in her confused mind, she saw an injustice. He turned to Elise with a look of false compassion. "We forgive her for her confusion, but we cannot forgive her actions." Meanwhile, small victories began to materialize. Jacob's motion, filed precisely at 2 p.m., caught the judge and prosecution completely by surprise. The judge, visibly annoyed by the complication, was forced to postpone the verdict to review the precedent. This gave Elise and Takumi another crucial 24 hours. It was during that window that Takumi made his biggest discovery. While analyzing Schwartz's financial records, he found a series of suspicious payments from a private security consultancy, the same consultancy owned by the brother of the police union chief. And the judge in the case, his daughter had received a full scholarship from the same firm 2 weeks before the trial began. The network wasn't just about prejudice, it was about deep-seated corruption. Elise was secretly preparing, not just to defend herself, but to dismantle the entire rotten system that had attacked her. She compiled everything into a flawless digital dossier, protected by multiple layers of encryption. Each piece of evidence was accompanied by metadata analysis, a timeline, and a relevant legal citation. It was a work of art of logic and truth. The night before the final day of the trial, she sent the dossier, not to the press, not to the Bar Association. She sent it to a single recipient, the Office of the State Judicial Oversight Board, with a succinct note: "Action required before 10 a.m. tomorrow. The integrity of the system is at stake." For a moment, as she accepted the looks of pity and scorn upon entering the courtroom the next morning, everyone thought they would witness just another predictable failure, another different person being put in her place. But anyone watching closely would notice that it wasn't fear making her hands, lightly clenched at her sides, tremble. It was the contained power of someone about to rewrite not just the end of her story, but the rules of the entire game. The courtroom was steeped in a grim anticipation. The judge, with a sour expression, rejected Jacob's motion. Marco Zielinski Schwartz's victory seemed complete. He walked slowly towards Elise, his face a mask of smug triumph. "Any last words, Ms. Lara, before the jury retires to confirm the obvious?" he taunted. Elise stood up, her posture perfectly straight. "Yes," she said, her voice echoing in the silence. "I would like to present new evidence." Schwartz laughed. "Too late. The time for that has passed." He turned to the officers. "Fournier, Roberts, please escort the defendant." It was at this moment that the system's arrogance spilled over into pure violence. Officer Carter Fournier, enraged by her audacity, grabbed her arm tightly. Elise, instinctively, recoiled from the pain and unwanted contact. Her reaction was interpreted by Fournier as resistance. "Stop resisting," he yelled, his face red with fury. And then he did. In front of the judge, the jury, and the entire gallery, he raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap across Elise's face. The crack split the air like a gunshot. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Time seemed to freeze. For a second, there was only shock. The prosecutor gaped. Fournier's partner, Roberts, paled. The judge began banging his gavel, yelling for order. But it was too late. The chaos was interrupted by a door opening at the back of the room. A senior court officer, his expression grim, walked purposefully to the bench and handed a sealed envelope to the judge. The judge opened it, his eyes scanning the document. The color drained from his face. He looked from Elise, who remained standing, the red mark on her cheek a stigma of the injustice she had just suffered, to the paper in his hands. He swallowed hard. "This court is in recess," he stammered, but the court officer shook his head. "Read the order aloud, Your Honor," the officer said, his voice leaving no room for debate. Trembling, the judge read, "By order of the State Judicial Oversight Board, based on irrefutable evidence of judicial misconduct, conflict of interest, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, the presiding judge of this case is summarily removed from his duties, effective immediately." A murmur of astonishment swept the room. Schwartz looked as if he had seen a ghost, but the final bomb was yet to come. The judge continued to read, his voice a thread. "To ensure the continuity of proceedings and the immediate restoration of judicial order, the Oversight Board invokes Emergency Statute 7.4b, which allows for the appointment of a qualified judge pro tempore. Based on her license to practice law, her impeccable record, and her intimate familiarity with the facts of this case, the Oversight Board appoints Elise Lara." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Elise Lara, the woman they had humiliated, underestimated, and assaulted, was now the highest authority in that room. Without a word, she bypassed the defense table, ascended the steps to the bench, and stood beside the stunned judge. He backed away as if she were on fire. With a dignity that brutally contrasted with the chaos around her, Elise picked up the gavel. She did not sit. She remained standing, looking out at the courtroom. Her eyes met Fournier's, now filled with abject panic. They met. Schwartz's, whose face was a mixture of disbelief and terror. "Court officer," Elise said, her voice calm but carrying a weight of undeniable authority. "Arrest Mr. Fournier for assault and Mr. Roberts as an accomplice. Arrest Mr. Schwartz for conspiracy and bribery, and escort the former judge to a waiting room. He also has questions to answer." Chaos transformed into action. The court officers, now obeying a new authority, moved swiftly. As Fournier was cuffed, his face contorted with rage and fear, Elise addressed the stunned jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the case of the state versus Elise Lara is hereby dismissed, with extreme prejudice to the prosecution. You are excused with the court's thanks." She then turned to the gallery and made a gesture. Takumi Jones stood up, a laptop in hand. "Now," said Judge pro tempore Elise Lara, banging the gavel for the first time, "let's begin the real trial." In the shocked silence of that courtroom, one truth became crystal clear. They had not slapped a defenseless woman. They had slapped the judge who would sentence them, and justice, long delayed, was about to be served full, methodical, and absolutely unyielding. The resolution wasn't an explosion, but a systematic reconstruction. In the months following that dramatic day, Elise Lara did not continue as a judge. That was never her goal. Her appointment was an emergency measure, a legal anomaly she used with surgical precision to expose the rot at the heart of the system. Once the warrants were issued and the formal investigation began, she resigned from the temporary position. But her impact was permanent. The woman they had tried to silence now had everyone's attention. She was invited to lead a statewide task force for judicial and police reform. There, her true genius bloomed. Using her data analysis skills, she and her team, which included a now publicly celebrated Takumi Jones and a newly partnered Jacob Aiden, created an open-source software system for courts across the state. The program automatically flagged conflicts of interest, analyzed sentencing patterns to identify racial or social biases, and created an immutable public record of all digital evidence presented in criminal cases. She transformed her personal ordeal into a tool to protect countless others. She didn't just win her case, she changed the rules of the game for everyone. Public recognition came, but Elise treated it like another set of data to be processed. She gave lectures, not about her overcoming story, but about the importance of transparency, logic, and listening to the voices the system routinely ignores. She became a fierce advocate for neurodiversity in fields like law, technology, and journalism, arguing that having minds that function differently isn't a disadvantage but an evolutionary advantage for society. Her success was quiet, methodical, and undeniable. Meanwhile, the fate of her tormentors was a noisy downward spiral. Marco Zielinski Schwartz was disbarred. The evidence Elise compiled was so overwhelming that he accepted a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. Photos of him in a prison jumpsuit were a stark contrast to the image of the arrogant, impeccably dressed lawyer who had haunted the courtroom. He lost his career, his reputation, and his freedom. Carter Fournier and Michael Roberts were summarily dismissed from the police force. In addition to criminal charges of assault, perjury, and obstruction of justice, they faced a civil lawsuit filed by Elise, not for money, but for principle. The full settlement amount was donated to a foundation offering legal aid to people with disabilities. The last news of Fournier was that he was working as a night security guard at a warehouse, a broken man haunted by the memory of the day he slapped the woman who held the power to destroy his world with a single gavel strike. The former judge, disgraced, was forced into early retirement, losing most of his pension and becoming a pariah. In the legal community that had once revered him, Jacob Aiden, the young lawyer who had almost lost hope, became a rising star in civil law. He frequently cited Elise as his greatest mentor. "She taught me that the law isn't just about what's written in books," he said in an interview. "It's about the courage to apply the logic of justice even when the entire system is against you." On a quiet day, a year later, Elise was in her new office, a minimalist space with an entire glass wall, overlooking the city. She was no longer swaying to calm herself. She stood still, observing the traffic patterns below, not with anxiety, but with a sense of restored order. The best revenge, she realized, wasn't about inflicting pain. It was about proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were wrong. Wrong about her, wrong about justice, wrong about power. They tried to define her by her condition, but in the end, it was her condition that gave them their final definition: guilty. And you? What would you have done in Elise's place? Leave in the comments if you've ever felt the world underestimated you and how you proved everyone wrong. If stories of intelligent justice inspire you, like this video and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that show that sometimes the calmest mind is the most powerful weapon. He tried to destroy Elise, but ended up destroying himself. Elise learned that true revenge isn't about returning the harm suffered. It's about achieving the success her enemies could never imagine.